church congregations do it. I remember the good old days. We used to do this, and we used to do that, and, you know, when I was younger, I could do this, and when I was younger, we could do that, and I remember church we were at in Florida, and God did an amazing thing at that church when Roberta and I first started being part of that church. There was about 150 people there, and 3 years later, God had grown the church to over 1,000 people and was blessing us financially, and we ended up building a new facility and everything. And I can remember somebody coming up to me and saying, talking about the good old days, you know, about, he was a little disgruntled because we had 3 services. You know, we had actually 2 contemporary services and a traditional service. And the traditional, we would actually change the whole stage during it. We had people whose ministry was to change the pulpit, and the pastors would like jump into phone booths and come out with their black suits and their white ties on, and the thing would be centered, and the bell would go off, and we would sing 3 hymns and take the offering at a particular time. And a lot of people grew up in that, and that was foundational. And we didn't want to take that away from anybody, but we wanted to speak in the language of the day too. You know, that's so important, speaking in the language of the day. I'm challenged with that too. I've been kind of obstinate about having a Facebook page. Because it seems like everybody's trying to steal my identity. And I deal with that a lot. And sometimes I just don't want to be out there. Besides, I have a youth pastor now, so I don't have to do Facebook. She does it. You know, I used to do a lot of, and try to keep up with it. But I remember the good old days, you know. And I'll never forget that at that church, though. Somebody was a little disappointed that we were no longer the small church, and we were no longer had just the one service, and we no longer seemed to have that intimacy as the church began to grow. They were concerned that we were losing our intimacy, and it was like, oh, pastor, you know, I remember the good old days, and I wanted, and I listened, and I just wanted so much to say, man, these are the good old days. Look what God is doing in our presence. Look at the people that hearing the message of God and coming into the church. Look at the people who are being ministered to. Man, these are the good old days right now. What God is doing right now and what God's going to do tomorrow. It's so easy to allow our past successes. And you know what? When that church was 150, it was a great church too. And I'm not taking anything away from that church. It was a great and wonderful church and ministered to it. But God had a vision to share His Son, for Jesus died because of God's love for the world, God's desire to bring that which He created into Himself. And we are commissioned to share the gospel. And so it's important that we speak in the language of the day. And as a church, we can't say, well, just because we led the Charge for God rally for 2 years that we're good to go. No. We need to be thinking about, well, what do we need to do to reach more people for Christ? Maybe we need to really, you know, get more people involved in this food pantry ministry back here so we can begin running ads in the paper and having people come in. But gosh, we need 15 or 20 people to be able to give the counseling we need and to be able to provide the food. And God's beginning to open up the door with some support from externally from this church for food. But God's trying to call us somewhere, and we just can't stay where we were because what we did was great. And as individuals, you just can't stay where you were because what you did was great. God brings us something special. The real sense of change. It happens every day. We don't need a great political leader or a great program or anything, but we need to experience what God is doing and move with the Spirit. And so the caution is our past failures and our past successes can hold us back from seeing what's out there. Paul, we just heard what Paul said. He was saying, not that I'm already there, but the one thing I do, I forget what's behind, and I press toward tomorrow. Now listen, let's go back a few verses in that same chapter of Philippians, back to 4:6, and Paul says this. He says, if anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. In other words, he's saying, if any of you all think you're too big for your britches, let me tell you about myself. He said, I was circumcised the 8th day, the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. Concerning the law, a Pharisee. Not only was he a Pharisee, he was a Sanhedrin, which means he had like a Harvard law degree. And he's talking to the Jews. He's talking to the Jews, and he's trying to witness to them about Christ. And they're talking about the righteousness that they have in themselves and who they are. And Paul is saying, you know what? That's all a bunch of gobbledygook. If anybody's got anything to boast, I got all the credentials. I got the pedigree. He said, concerning zeal, persecuting the church. I mean, he held the coats for Stephen. He said, concerning righteousness, which is the law, blameless. He said, based on the law, he was blameless. Chuck Swindoll said this. He said, if you were looking for someone to give a testimony next Sunday, he said Paul would be a winner if he would let himself do it. But Paul probably wouldn't, because he would be afraid that it would be a braggamony. But in verse 7, he says this, Paul, the Apostle Paul. Actually, God is saying it to us. No matter who we think we are, we're not there. Paul, speaking in himself to the Jews, said, but to the Philippians, he said, but what things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. He said, those things that I used to think that were important, those pretensions that used to occupy my mind, those strongholds that I used to place my righteousness on, he said, I give up for Christ. And in verse 12 and 13, that's why he can say this. He says, not that I've already obtained or am already perfect, but I press on. In other words, he lives his life daily, he presses on. He said, the one thing I do is I forget what's behind me and I move ahead. Caution 3, looking back at past injuries may cause you to strike out in the presence. Looking at past memories may cause you to strike out in the presence. You know what I'm talking about? Remember a few weeks back, God was saying, we need to develop an attitude to take hold of our minds, that we should have a desire to bless people and bless people with the best, not to bless people how we were blessed. It's kind of funny. One of my kin used to say, I really blessed them out. That was their way of saying that, they gave them a chewing or whatever. They gave them a piece of their mind. They gave them what for? And here's what I've learned about injuries, that as I have went through life, or maybe you could say, as you've been bumped or scratched or knocked down or bruised or cut or deeply wounded by the hands of other people, those exchanges and interactions can create wounds that oftentimes are difficult to heal. And when we continually look back at how we've been mistreated, it can create and bring us to the forefront of causing pain for other people in the present and ourselves. If we focus on those hurtful times, if we focus on those bad times and those bad experiences, it can hinder us, it can hurt us. It's amazing that psychologists have shared, and there's been cases where people have experienced things so horrific in their life that the mind takes control and blocks it completely out with a type of healing amnesia. My wife, Roberta, you love it when I do this, I know, honey. For years, Roberta and I have been plagued with an issue. She don't like when I talk this, because nobody likes to say that we're weak, but do you know what the vagus nerve is? Vagus nerve. It's like some control box in your mind, and when things just don't go the way that it wants to, it just shuts down. And here about, I don't know, it's been 20 years ago, I guess. Time flies when you're having fun. 20 years ago, she's eating guacamole, and her stomach, my stomach hurts, and she passes out in church. Called the ambulance for her, gave her a ride down. They run about $10,000 at the test, couldn't find anything wrong. Don't know what it was. It was a freak thing. About 3 years later, my stomach hurts. She passes out in the bathroom, splits her head open on the commode. Dr. Dave had to give her some butterfly stitches and fix her right up. They run tests, didn't know what it was. Come to the conclusion that One doctor said, well, the only thing we can say it's your vagus nerve. And we said, well, what's that mean? Well, when your body experiences a certain type of pain or it doesn't do it, it just shuts down. So now she has friends, and God will make good use of this story, because if Roberta ever says that her stomach is bothering her, she disappears to go somewhere, and you see the pastor pacing, it's because I've picked her up off the bathroom floor too many times. And that's why Robin, when Robin's with her, or I think Sharon's aware of it, or a few people, and I'll say, would you do me a favor? Would you go back and see if Bert's okay? I mean, it just shuts down. And fortunately, Bert don't go around and try to give people tainted guacamole, because she experiences that. But some of us, because we've had hard times, we want to give hard times to other people. And we can even do it when we don't even know we're doing it. We can be miserable and ugly to people. And a lot of times, who we're the ugliest toward is the people closest in our life. I mean, we're masters at putting a smile on and getting along in the world and getting along out there somewhere. And when we come home, we just do that dump on people, don't we? Because we've been hurt and had a bitter day. Here's what Hebrews 12 says. A bitter spirit is not only bad in itself, but can also poison the lives of many others. I want to wrap this up here. Here real quick, throw some scripture out. Romans 12, 17 through 19 says, never pay back evil for evil, never avenge yourself. Leave that to God, for He has said He will repay those that deserve it. There's going to come a day when we're all going to give an account. And the books are going to be brought out, and justice is going to be served. So we're all going to give account. Psalm 147:3 says, He heals the broken hearts and binds up their wounds. Last caution. Looking back at the past in general may cause you to turn back from the Lord. Perhaps this is the most fearful one. Sometimes we experience things that we get angry with God with. Or God doesn't move as we would like Him to move, and we get angry. And in John 6:66, it's kind of funny, that scripture, John 6:66. And I said the other one was kind of a sad scripture. This one's really bad. It said, from time to time, many of His disciples went back and walked with Him no more. Maybe somebody can, that's a sad scripture. People didn't walk with Jesus anymore. I catch little things like that. John 6:66, 3 sixes. Anyway. There's a story in the Old Testament about a guy by the name of Joseph.